everyone. It's a beautiful room. Thank you all for being here. I had sort of a fantasy that I failed to do anything about last night. I was in Minneapolis last night, and it was the first event. So we launched this baby in New York, I want to say 3 nights ago, but time is weird right now. And then I started my book tour, and I always feel like for writers when we say tour, and it sounds so glamorous, but it's not. It's just not what tour means for like musicians or like really cool people. So I had this dream for this fantasy for like my first night, which was last night in Minneapolis, that I would come in and be like, "Hello, Minneapolis," and I wouldn't just do that. I would ask the audience to play along, and they would like scream or whatever. And then I get in there, and it's like this well-lit auditorium, and I was just like, that is not gonna fly. So if you'll play along. I feel slightly embarrassed, but I'm just gonna do it. Will you play along? Will you not leave me stranded? Okay. Hello, Missoula! Oh my God, so many good souls in this room for playing this game with me. Thank you. How the hell do we transition from what we just did to this very serious topic? I do not know, but we're about to find out together. So we have an incredible lineup of incredible writers who have agreed to join this event and read with me tonight, both from their own brilliant words and their own selections from this book. I'm going to be bookending the event, so I'll read a little bit to you now from the forward, and then a little bit at the end from my own story. And when I say a little bit, I really mean a little bit, like 3 minutes at a time. And then after that, the amazing Caroline Keyes is going to play some music. And then after that, we'll either stay around and chat, or we'll do an impromptu Q&A, which I just made not impromptu by declaring that might happen. That's kind of the plan. I always like audience to, have a container, like know the container size, know what's happening. So that's what's happening here tonight. You know the beginning. In October 2017, a major newspaper broke a story about a famous producer, a serial predator, a man who wears his ugly on his skin. And our communal ether filled with women's voices, sharing private horrors, amplifying and echoing one another's words, all stamped with a hashtag. I'd recently finished writing a short story about a woman who murders men, a tale about the potential consequences of sexual harassment. And I emailed Christina Kearns, then executive director of McSweeney's, asking if she'd like to publish it. I used the words quick and soon. I used the word timeliness. I thought, how many news cycles do we have left? I assumed that in a week, the hashtag would stop trending and the world would resume its collective disinterest in everything it revealed. I spent those early days of Me Too feeling devastated in advance. Sometimes I laugh at my 2017 self for her fear. Here we are, 2 years later, and the news cycle still hasn't ended. It birthed a global movement. But most of the time, I'm still scared that we'll stop trying to change the reality we exposed, or that we'll keep trying and ultimately fail. That our country will keep electing presidents and confirming Supreme Court judges who have abused women. My email to Christina initiated a long exchange between us about the role art and literature should play in a crucial cultural moment. What is the point of being a publisher or editor, Christina asked me, if one isn't responding to and deepening the conversation? We need a book, she said. When she asked me to be the editor, I could not have been more thrilled. Books invite concentrated focus and offer an immersive experience. Christina and I both felt that giving physical form to a revolution that lived predominantly on the internet would be a meaningful act. At that time, the end of 2017, the stories of beautiful actresses, most of whom were white and straight, dominated the forming narrative, even though a black woman, Tarana Burke, founded the Me Too movement in 2006. It felt essential to me, as a queer woman, as a writer who immigrated to this country at age 25, and also as a person aware of her own privilege, to start the work of compiling this book by reaching out to writers of various backgrounds. I wanted to hear from Black writers, Latinx writers, Asian writers. I wanted to hear from writers who identify as queer and writers who identify as trans. I also wanted to hear from writers who were adults before I was born, who could offer a broader perspective. Which is to say that I wanted these sentences from contributor Honor Moore. I remember the beginning of women's liberation. I don't remember particular conversations, but I remember the feeling I got when a woman declared she didn't need any movement. And this one, from contributor Gabby Belly. I had read too many stories of trans women who went to the police after men harassed them and were told by the cops that it was their own fault. What do you expect? The officers asked. When you dress like a woman. I'm going to stop here. Thank you. And please continue this applause as you help me welcome Sharma Shields.
Hi everybody, thank you. Thank you, Shelly, for this vital book. I'm going to start by reading just a few short passages, just excerpts really, from Paisley Rechtel's beautiful essay in this that's called Nightingale, a Gloss. And Paisley is a poet that I really love. Probably a lot of you are familiar with some of her poems. If you're not, I really highly recommend them, and she talks a little bit about her work in this. She also talks about Titus Andronicus, and also about Ovid's Metamorphoses, which I also talk about in the essay I will read after this piece. So I feel like there's quite a few connections there. Nightingale, a Gloss by Paisley Rechtel. Nay then, I'll stop your mouth. From Shakespeare, Titus Andronicus, Act 2. Language is the first sight of loss and our first defense against it. Which is why, after Philomelas' brother-in-law Tereus rapes her, he cuts out her tongue and tosses it, the bloody stump writhing at her feet. In my poem, Philomela, I leave out this mutilation. Strike out Philomela's sister, Procne, who learns of her sister's rape from the tapestry Philomela weaves. Cut the death of Itis, Procne's son, whom the sisters dismember and boil for punishment. Philomela, mute but grinning, tossing the boy's head at his father. No metamorphosis of Philomela and Procne into nightingale and swallow. Tereus shrunk into the hopi that pursues him. The hoopoe that pursues them. Such details would be unimaginable, I think. Not because a contemporary reader can't imagine them, but because the details are now too grotesque for her to want to. I'm writing Philomela at an artist colony where I go for daily runs. Sometimes a man in a car will pace me, sometimes a man on his bike will circle back to get another look. Sometimes the men who pass me say nothing. Around this residency are woods in which the staff informs us we can walk. It is beautiful there, and there are olive groves. I do not walk by myself in the woods. It's 1992 and I'm hiking near Loch Ness. It's just after breakfast. I spent the morning alone in a stand of gold aspen that circles the lake. When the three men find me, the smell of beer and whiskey thick on their clothes, bait boxes and fishing rods in hand, I have just sat down with a book. The men are red-eyed, gruff. The first two nod as they pass me. It is the third who walks back. He has lank, gingery hair and black spots in his teeth. Hello, he says when he reaches me. Female nightingales do not sing. Only the male sings, as Tereus does, attempting to woo Philomela with words. Love made him eloquent, Ovid writes, suggesting that Tereus's language is aroused by Philomela's silence. What space is a woman? There is no scream after the tongue is cut, but would we hear a cry? Philomela screams only in the text, thus in our minds, In that, her body and our own do not communicate. We cannot hear her. We want to, but she exists only in our imagination, an absent body that exists in the past or an unforeseeable future. She begs for help we can never give. It is absurd to suggest we could. In that sense, she never needed a tongue to scream for help. She never had one. The rape isn't described in my poem Philomela. It takes place off stage, recorded years after the event by the character who experienced it. I left out the rape, thinking to reject a reader's voyeurism. But the reader of myths knows what is left out. My silence, then, is not a revision, but an invitation to imagine, to remember this violence for yourself. I'm going to read, this is maybe going to be a mess, my reading this, but I'm going to read an essay that I wrote that was published last February in the New York Times, and it was one of the harder things I've ever seen go live that I'd written, and I can't speak to whether writing it was cathartic, but what has been really cathartic are a lot of conversations I've had with people, men and women, after I wrote this, and I'm really grateful for that. So, this is called Make Me a Cold and Pitiless Goddess. Obsessed with mythology as a girl, I read and reread the book of Greek myths by Ingrid and Edgar Perrin de Lair. I fell in love with Artemis, her lack of sentimentality, her plea to Zeus to never have to marry. I even admired her assassination of Actaeon, the man who spied on her as she bathed. She splashed him with water and turned him into a stag. He was devoured by his own hounds. The book calls her a cold and pitiless goddess, but to me she was self-assured, unapologetically powerful. In 4th grade, then 5th, I dorked out in the forest behind our farmhouse after school, wielding a plastic bow and hiding in the trees whenever a car passed by. Every now and again, I declared to no one, I shall not marry. I was a friend to wild animals and an enemy of insolent men. My mind spiraled open, ablaze with transformations, woman to tree, woman to white deer, woman to spider, metamorphosis and power. While reading my favorite book, I wondered about the word rape, as in the rape of Persephone. I lingered over the illustration of her descent into the yawning pit, Hades' arms securing her to the chariot. Above, in a blue dress, searching and despairing, was the faint figure of Demeter, the woebegone mother. I thought I understood what rape meant, when someone does something unwanted. In sex ed class, we watched a cartoon of an older man looming over a young girl. Your bathing suit covers your private parts. There was a rumor floating around about wicked things that happened to girls who walked around too stupidly on lonely streets at night, kicking and screaming in cold stairwells. That word again, rape. We giggled nervously. It felt like a sick joke. None of this prepared me for what a boy would do to me when I was 14 and he was 17. This was the moment of my own metamorphosis. One moment I was someone, the next someone else. Like Persephone, like Daphne, I was changed utterly by a desire that in no way reflected my own. The coldness that followed was more Pygmalion than Apollonian, more marble than wood. I told myself I felt nothing because nothing had happened. It didn't even occur to me to call it rape. I'm still unwilling to say it aloud, as if it gives him power over me, when I want rather to put my foot to his throat and tell him, give it back. I've been revisiting the de Lair's text, still a staple of school libraries, sharing it with my children. They too have their favorites. My daughter loves Athena and Arachne, my son, the Minotaur and Medusa. One evening I found myself reading aloud, Daphne would rather be an unmoving tree than the bride of the great god Apollo, but all the other nymphs loved to sit at his feet and listen to his enchanting music, and were very honored when he or any of the other great Olympian gods chose one of them as a bride. In other words, trust us, plenty of babes are jonesing for these fine dudes. You know what? I told my son, age 9, and my daughter, age 6. I don't agree with this at all. We talked, as we have before, about consent, about their ownership over their own bodies. I didn't go in depth with them about the euphemism of bride for sexual partner, but it's irritating. No wonder I felt so little for Daphne until I was old enough to recognize the familiarity of her desperation. No wonder I thought Hera was a jerk, Persephone a ditz. The book that told their stories also derided them. Artemis was a cold and pitiless goddess. Even Medusa, who was my gateway into mythology and monstrousness, is dumbed down by the Delaires. Ovid's Metamorphoses recounts the birth of Medusa's hideousness. She is raped by Poseidon in Athena's temple. Like many abusers, Poseidon faces no personal consequence. Athena can't reach him with her wrath. He is too powerful, even for a goddess, and so she ruins Medusa instead. Snakes for hair, reptile skin, a repulsiveness that renders her not only undesirable, but dangerous. In the Delaires recounting, Medusa's backstory is ignored. Perseus cuts off her ugly head while she sleeps. He uses a mirror to guide his stroke, a mirror that reflects the victim and not the perpetrator. After my own metamorphosis, a virgin, then not, I called the 17-year-old to break up with him. "You're stupid," he said, laughing. "You're immature. You don't just break up with someone because you're unhappy." The words paralyzed me. Around him, I grew murderously watchful, even as I let him do things to me I didn't want. There was horror there, but also a disturbing curiosity. He'd already taken everything, so what else could he do to me? My mom, like Demeter, stomped overhead, calling my name. She sensed I was gone, that something major was amiss. "Get out of this," she said. "Get away from him." She was worried I loved him, that I'd marry him and ruin my life. I laughed at her. Love him? I hated him. I told her to leave me alone, but now I look back at the picture of the girl being dragged into the underworld, and I marvel that my mom reached for me as immediately as she did. I scowled and rebuffed her, but I heard her too. Someone was fighting for me, her voice faint above the gray banks where I wandered, and I was less alone for it. Soon I turned 15. A couple of months later, the boy boasted to me that he was sleeping with a woman his own age, and I broke it off with him officially this time, sobbing not from grief, but from humiliation. My girlhood lay dead in a cold blue room, a room I never wanted to revisit, but I woke up the following morning grateful to be free. In the Delaires text, Pan tries to rape the nymph Syrinx. When she escapes by turning herself into a reed, Pan plucks 10 reeds from the ground and creates the first Pan pipe, declaring it the melodious voice of his beloved. I was lucky enough to keep my voice. I wrote. In my fiction, I've drowned one rapist and shot another. In my last book, the rapist gets away with it, as most do. But what I really want is a different kind of metamorphosis, to be not the woman altered, but the woman altering. What will it take for us to toss the water onto the rapists' heads, to watch assured as they flee, the blood-mouthed hounds, guilt say, or responsibility snapping behind them? It is not the violence of such a scene that attracts me, but the righteousness. Artemis was a cold and pitiless goddess. She knew, or learned, where to place the blame.
Hello. That was amazing. I am Tamara Love, and I want to thank Shelly for including me in this event. I'm going to read a piece. What's that?
Bring the mic closer to your mouth.
Mic closer to my mouth. All right. Oh, all right. Thank you. It'll probably help if I also keep my head still too. Yes. Is that better? Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay, I can even hear myself. So I'm going to read from the anthology here, and then I'm going to read a short, very short piece, I believe. I had a hard time sort of deciding what of my own work to read. But yeah, so here we go. So I'm going to read part of it's a poem by Donica Kelly. It's called, the title of it is Apologia. It begins as no apologia does, with an apology, a desire to offer something in return for what was taken under the black walnut tree, over the maggot fruit, or in the peach room, the door with no knob, the door unpainted, or in the kitchen, the linoleum worn and gold, or in my parents' bedroom, or in the den, or in the dining room, or in the living room, or anywhere. We've been alone. Is his hat in his hand? He doesn't wear a hat. I meant it more metaphorically. Still, he apologized. Still, he said he was sorry. Still, he offered me anything I wanted. He asked what I wanted, but what had he taken? What could he give me in return? 2. Even the second act begins with an apology. He sits in the passenger seat of my 1985 Honda Prelude. I am looking forward toward the shed of the house I used to live in, a house over 2,000 miles away from where he blank me. Inside, my mama is spinning, a tornado smashing her children into refuse. Who remembers when last she was sober? Who remembers? Outside in my car, the one headlight pulled up with bungee cord and hook. I ask my dad. I say, blank, question mark. So I just want to clarify, so in these spaces where I say blank, it's the thing that she's not able to say, or is at least not able to write. And so that space here in the poem stands in for that. So I just want to clarify that, what's happening there. He looks forward. He is too big for the car. His hands are scarred and calloused. They haven't been cleaned for longer than I remember. I remember how high he would throw the ball. I remember him picking me up when I was asleep, how safe and then unsafe I felt, all the ways he carried me away. He is sorry for the blank me, though he will not admit to blank me to anyone outside this car. Not my aunts and great aunts, not my grandfather, not my mama. Although all of them know what he has done, although each believes every man capable of such a thing. Still, this is how he convinces me for the second time. This is no apologia, but an apology. No argument in defense of blank me. I take what little he gives because I believe the lowered head, the strained voice, his hands so dirty in his own lap. 3. The small shames are the hardest to say. We went to the toy store. I picked out a small model plane. The rubber cement, I remember the paints were too expensive, so no paint. What did my brother and sister get? No way, I got a toy. And them, nothing. Paperboy on the radio, too short. The sun shining on our way to the mall. On the way back. Fucking California sun. The plane, the only thing I could think to say. I had wanted it. or something like it, for so long, so frivolous, the plane, with no paint. But I put together the rest of the afternoon, what he gave me in return. Four, now the apologia, poorly argued, a statement he would never say to me. Because we have not spoken to each other in over 5 years, and we would not have spoken, not because he blanked me, but because my mama died. And the doctors brought her back after she cried and cried and cried. For what was lost in the long, arduous road ahead, he brought my mama a 12-pack of beer and left for the night, and the night after, and many more besides. Which means he did not walk into my bedroom unhidden, did not stand just inside the open door, a body full of sway and swagger, the beer ruining his breath. He did not set, his wheel gazing in my direction to tell me, I am not sorry, I liked it. I would do it again if I had the chance. Again, if I had the chance. Again. I am not sorry. I am not sorry. Not sorry. Not sorry. But I'll ask, what kind of argument is this? What warranty? What evidence? What pathos? What logos? What ethos? What else but the drunken slurring of a God-turned man and some flickering light? And besides, who asked what he wanted? Looks like a lot of sheets here, but I think I'm actually going to just read from one page. And this is an excerpt from an essay that's not finished and doesn't have a title yet. And it's an essay actually about that's connected to my grandmother. We're not connected, it's about my grandmother. So, how are you guys doing? All right. I'm just going to read this one page. So just a touch of background. At this point, when I'm having this conversation with my grandmother, I was living with her and taking care of her for a time when she had gotten really ill, a few years before she passed, and so she had developed Alzheimer's, but it was the first time I had ever lived with her for any length of time, and so this conversation, or what I learned, happened during that time. I pressed my grandmother one evening about the years before she married my grandfather, George Love. She was 29 or 30 when they married, well beyond the traditional age of marriage for young women at that time. When I asked, my grandmother described in cryptic language a man who was interested in her, quote unquote. My grandmother was 17. I just didn't know anything about men, she said. Papa was like to have killed you if he thought you were just thinking about a man. He was determined that his daughters would not be a disgrace to the family. I don't blame him. Grandma continued. This man came into my room. I didn't know what he wanted. I moved from one corner to the next. He just kept after me. He was too strong. His grip. Her voice drifts off. I tried to get from underneath him, but he was too heavy. I tried to scream. And then Papa. Her voice falls away again. She explained that a policeman came to their house that evening, the officer nodding in agreement with my grandmother's father, when he said barely above a whisper, I have the right to protect my girls. And then the police officer left. Her dad didn't kill the man. He didn't need to. Grandma stared at the floor as she blinked back her tears. It's the first time she's ever talked to me about this, and I find myself wanting to hold her. But I don't, because that's not what we do. Instead, we sit in silence for a minute before she gets up and goes to the bathroom. Thank you.
I think Tamara is taller than me. Is this working?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. I'll just see the microphone in the middle of the room instead of your faces, but that's okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm Melissa Stephenson. I'm a local writer. I write poetry, creative nonfiction, and fiction, and I just want to take a moment to point out that there are books for sale by the door. The Cassandra by Sharma is an amazing, badass work of feminist fiction. It's one of my favorite books, and if you haven't read it, you should. My memoir, Driven, is for sale there too.
Yeah.
And this anthology is just stunning. I just bought a copy, and I'm just saying that because I know half of us are trying to just pay our grocery bill all the time. But when something speaks to you and it's a work of art and you can support it, we really appreciate it. I'd give a trigger warning, but you guys are so brave. You have chosen to be in this room, and so thank you for being here. So you know the subject matter at hand. I'm going to read a poem. There's a poet in here, Lynn Melnick. She has 6 poems in here. They're all stunning, and there's nothing about this poem that's easy, but it's amazing. Some ideas for existing in public. I think you should grip your dick through your jeans and ask me if I can handle it, because you know I can, right? I'm here for you. I think you should overtake me at a bus bench and invite me to sit on your face. I think you should track me down the block to clarify how you'd like to split my slit open until I pass out. Once, as a kid, I was balancing on a ledge all morning, thinking no one could see me, until a man walked by and captured my chin in his grip and called me doll face. I think you should screw me sideways right here on the sidewalk. Like you said, you might like to screw me sideways before you took off past the cop who said it's pointless to prove the crime, so come on shore, screw me sideways. And why just sideways? Why not always? Why not diagonal? I think you should whistle so loud at my fat ass that I jump like a stray rodent. And you couldn't be more correct. It's a shame my fat ass is walking away from you. Because why is it walking away from you? Why am I walking away from you? Why am I here on the sidewalk? I'm yours. I like how I printed up my whole essay like it has to travel together, even though I'm just reading a part of it, because I don't want it to be incomplete in the world. That seems negligent. I am reading a third of an essay, which is already a little problematic, but I felt I had to read this essay here. I wrote it last September at the end of the month. I had flown out for this residency in Brooklyn, a writing residency, and I was thrilled that on the plane they had these little free movies. It was Delta, and you could watch the free movies. I chose the Mr. Rogers movie, and then I felt guilty the way I feel guilty now that I might be making you guys feel things that are uncomfortable. And I was bawling, so on the flight back, I thought, I'm going to choose a movie that's going to be light. And I had been repressing the whole Dr. Ford thing. I knew that she was testifying. I was in New York City. I was on the subways. It was everywhere. And I thought, yeah, I'll just get to that later. And so I got on the plane. I wanted to decompress. I wanted to fly home. And I was like, oh, Thelma and Louise, I'll watch that. Any of you who don't know that movie, in short, you need to know that it's extremely bizarre now to watch, as I experienced. But the two women are getting away, one from an abusive husband. There's a sexual assault scene it's assault, and it only does not become sexual assault because one of the friends shoots the guy who is the perpetrator. And then these two women are in a lot of hot water, and it keeps spiraling until their only viable choice really is to drive off into the Grand Canyon and die. I had not seen this movie since I was 16. It was quite devastating, and I want to get to it here as I try to read a third of this essay. I think the only other thing you need to know near the ending is that I'm from Columbus, Indiana. I grew up there. I saw Thelma and Louise on my hometown theater when I was 16, and Mike Pence is from my hometown. I've heard it said that children who experience extreme neglect eventually stop crying because they no longer expect their needs to be fulfilled. I see the parallel in Thelma and Louise, which is to say rape culture, which is to say our country. Louise knew not to get help because, it's implied, help never arrived when she'd been hurt and cried out before. Reporting rape often causes secondary trauma through questioning, blame, and exposure. It's like giving a hungry child who cries the belt instead of food. Almost every woman you know knows this silence. I include dialogue from the script. Louise, I said I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it either. I know the girl I was when this movie came out in 1991, a girl who had already experienced multiple assaults. And I have little doubt that when I saw the movie, the assault and misogyny washed right over me, because I already assumed that's the way things went. Or, as David Foster Wallace put in the opening of his This Is Water speech, one fish asks another, "How's the water?" The other fish responds, "What the hell is water?" By 16, I was steeped in those waters, acclimated to them, and like everyone, I navigated that fishbowl the best way I could to survive. It has been said that trauma can be passed on through generations, through DNA, some believe, or abuse, the idea that hurt people, or learned behavioral patterns, the things we don't talk about. My parents never talked about sexual assault, though my mother did once save me from a pedophile who ran the Schwinn BMX biking team, of which I was a pint-sized member at age 8, the youngest by far, and the only girl. She did what women have known to do for ages, quietly remove themselves from the situation. She pulled me from the team, with my consent, and the pedophile carried on, unaffected. I did once fight off an attacker while hitchhiking solo in the wilds of Alaska, and I did hike a fat chunk of the Appalachian Trail, most of it solo, after I ditched my partner who fell asleep each night with mace by her head. She was terrified because of her past assault, she told me, a topic that made me always reroute the conversation. True, 2 women our age had been found the summer before in the same area, bound, gagged, and stripped, with their throats slit. Still, I found her fear repellent. I might have even said to her, "You're inviting bad energy. You're making bad luck." Because I already knew victims of sexual assault were seen as weak, I would be strong. I would drive all over the country. I would hitchhike alone in Alaska. I would hike the Appalachian Trail solo because my partner was too weak to keep up with me. I weighed 98 pounds, my breasts 2 sizes smaller than they had been when I was 15 and 16. I could become invisible, my friends joked, by simply standing sideways. I could not and would not be caught. That's how so many of us learn to survive assault, by keeping lists of places we won't go, things we won't do, people we refuse to see. We amputate these parts of ourselves in hopes that we will never let assault happen to us again. We leave jobs and relationships and entire states as a way to protect ourselves in a culture that won't protect us, a culture where the roots of blame trace all the way back to the Bible. Eve ate the apple, and look what happened. No one wants to be the bad apple, the bruised fruit, the woman who let her hair down and killed paradise. Thelma, I know this whole thing was my fault. I know it is. Louise, there's one thing you ought to understand by now, Thelma. It's not your fault. Imagine the power of silence behind sexual assault. Imagine it running up your family line, an inherited muteness you can trace back for thousands of years. Imagine generations so steeped in it that they are born knowing not to cry out, not to speak of it. Whether it's in the right wiring of their brains, the architecture of their DNA, or an inability to attach language to events, they've been gaslighted into unremembering. If you can imagine it, it might look a lot like Thelma and Louise. It might look so similar that a girl like me, well versed in assault, watches the film and is so riveted by the character's independence that she sets her sights on the only kind of lust that feels safe. Wanderlust. Be tough, she thinks. Be a badass. Don't ever let them catch you again. Louise, we're not giving up, Thelma. Thelma, then let's not get caught. Louise, what are you talking about? Thelma, indicating the Grand Canyon. Go. Go? Thelma is smiling at her. Go. When I was young, I thought this ending too campy because I still possessed limitless energy and an irrational kind of hope. And I didn't yet know how small you become when you delete one part of yourself after another. For most of my 30s, I felt my experience with assault hadn't much affected me because I was a functional human, a mother of 2 with a husband and a master's degree, and eventually a full-time tenure-track job teaching community college. But I see now the kind of emotional nerve damage I'd suffered, how I felt so much nothing about assault until I felt something. Then it was the emotional equivalent of a lightning strike. That's why they call them triggers, and why Louise's was so literal. On the plane at the end of Thelma and Louise, the ending of Thelma and Louise made the 40-something me cry because I had driven off too many cliffs in this lifetime already. And I'm fed up with the Midwestern grin and bear it notion of strength I was raised on, stoicism, tempered with niceness. I don't want to talk about my assaults for all kinds of reasons. My experience is pale in comparison to what others have endured. I also have my own family and emotional well-being to consider. And I don't owe anyone my stories. They belong to me alone. Is it possible, I wonder, to let them go without letting them out? Thelma, Louise, where are we going? Louise, I don't know. Just shut up a minute so I can think. I will tell you that Mike Pence's hometown is my Texas, but since I was 15 and 16, I've never felt totally at ease in a dress and tights, and that I am careful with champagne in the company of men. I will tell you that if I never again hear the Van Morrison song and it stoned me, my life would be better for it. Thelma, Louise, no matter what happens, I'm glad I came with you. Louise, you're crazy. Exterior desert road day. Louise swerves off the road and begins driving across the desert. All the police cars take off across the desert after them. They are now being pursued by at least 15 police cars. Thelma, you're a good friend. Louise, you too, sweetie, the best. The older I get, the more I notice all the women out there like me, holding the best parts of their life in one hand while binding the rest together with chicken wire, duct tape, and silence. The older I get, the louder the silence becomes. If you want to tell your story or your Texas, I will listen. I will be a helper, as so many of you have been mine. And if you don't want to talk about it, I get it. I hear you too. Either way, I want to second what most of us already know, that the water is cold. The water is bullshit. The water in the fish bowl needs to be changed.
Hi. It's me again, but I'm a whole new person. What I've been learning at these events is that I've failed to factor in the feelings that come up when I stand and listen to these kinds of works. Not that I would know how to factor it in, but I have not yet figured that out, and there's a lot of feelings that come up. Both in hearing the pieces from the anthology that I've read and edited and read a million times, and still, whenever I read them, whenever I hear them, and especially when I hear them read from another writer I admire, and just by a new person, a new mouth that somehow brings new spirit to it and makes me feel a whole lot. This was a monologue about something, I don't know what. I'm going to take a picture of you all because you look beautiful, if you don't mind. That's one thing that's happening. And the other thing that this reminds me to do is the thing that we've been doing at these events is that if you have taken pictures and if you think you took good pictures, and if you wouldn't mind the extra few seconds, if you can email them to indeliblethebook@gmail.com, and that's super helpful to us. As promised before, I'm just going to read for about 3 minutes from the beginning of my own story in this book, and then we have arrived at the music part of our event. This is But We Will Win. The first man I killed was probably a sweetheart. He didn't say anything dirty or try to start a fight like some of the others. He just asked if I knew her, the woman in the picture. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Roxy used to tell me, you talk like whoever's listening already knows what you're about to say. I always wanted to ask, why shouldn't I? Now it's too late. From what I understand, Roxy's father named her Roxy, just Roxy, not short for anything, because he was Greek. And in his language, the name means star, or something close to star. He was a poet, possibly a bad one. On the day she was born, he glared at her for hours through the viewing room glass, a baby among babies, and wrote a poem about the newborn who shone like a star in his sky. Later, his wife read the poem, and perhaps because she had nothing else to say, she offered to name the child after the title. When Roxy told me the story, the red of her hair a dark brown that day, the color trick it played when cut short, and her eyes made softer somehow by the new edges, I asked whether her father wrote the poem in Greek or in English. We were sharing ice cream that was supposedly made of lemonade, a hip new import from Switzerland or maybe Sweden. On the bench outside the fake ice cream parlor, Roxy gave me a look that suggested my question was dumb. She did that sometimes. At random moments, all kinds of feelings from the previous week or month, perhaps feelings that had gone unexpressed because Roxy always worked hard to stay sweet, suddenly found their way to her eyebrows, her lips, the creases of her forehead. She seemed unaware of her face when it responded before she did, so I learned early on to smile and wait. When her words caught up, they often changed the subject. There's no way this is actually lemonade, right? Roxy said that day. It's the best thing I've ever put in my mouth. I made a pamphlet after Roxy died. The front features a picture of her and the 2 dates bookending her life. It says, this woman died of sexual harassment. The back cites statistics. Tens of thousands of women die of sexual harassment in this country every day, that sort of thing. Of course, the number refers to deaths small and big, quiet and loud, personal and public, but the brochure doesn't go into that sort of detail. My point was to bring attention to the larger issue. Roxy would have been disappointed in anything less. The story of a woman is the story of a nation, she'd have said. When we keep our stories so small that people can't see the world through them, we fail. Or perhaps she wouldn't have said that at all. Perhaps that's just me assuming again that my listener already knows what I'm about to say. But if I commemorated the life of one fatality without lamenting the larger war, who would I even be? I still use my pamphlet sometimes. Situate myself on a street corner not unlike the one in my old town where Roxy was killed. Shout out some truths. Distribute that carefully crafted piece of glossy paper to passers-by. But not often. It causes friction with my new girlfriend, who believes it's unsafe. There are men out there just waiting for an excuse to rape, she says. She's right, of course. We've seen our world turn against us. We have seen women's bodies violated, then jailed for the crimes they suffered. We have seen laws modified to protect the strong. But what my girlfriend really means is, and then you'll off somebody again, and then we'll have to move again. She'll never say it. She doesn't want to appear jealous of a dead girl. Instead, she hides my weapons when she thinks I'm rageful. The good knife behind the meat in the freezer, the gun in the laundry basket. Silly girl, I say and pull her close. You think I need anything more than these? To show her my hands. I'm going to stop here. Thank you. Everybody.
Hi, you guys. It's a real honor to be included here tonight, and I'm going to play 3 songs. What did you give up? Or did you just give up? Was it something you believed? Or did you forget to leave? And what does it mean to stay? You didn't mean to stay. What you got to show for all of this time? It's all the things you build, and then what you find. And what does it mean to stay? You didn't mean to stay. Stay. Good or bad, day or night, black and blue, wrong or right. Try to make some peace, live what's left of your life. And what does it mean to stay? You didn't mean to stay. And what does it mean to stay when you can't help but stay? Stay. Stay. I'll just play a couple more. This one is from a project I'm working on. I'm writing a response album to Justin Timberlake's Man of the Woods. He released an album about Montana last year, and I feel like he missed some stuff. So I'm taking all of the titles of the songs on his album, and I'm writing my own Montana stories with his titles. And I want to give a shout out to my writing group who's here tonight, because I blew up our reading tonight and I wanted to come here to play this. So thank you guys. Anyway, this one is called, well, his record's called Man of the Woods. This is called Woman of the Woods, and it's about animals that like wild animals that kind of try to come in your house. Like they're supposed to be outside, but they try to come in, and I kind of identify with them because I don't really feel like I belong in a house or in like a cohabitating sort of relationship all the time. And yeah, anyway, yeah, listen for the animals. What's more worthy of an anthem than the spider in your bathtub, coming out of the rain? She's making her home right by the drain. What could wreak more havoc than the squirrels up in your attic, trying to run a love campaign? I swear to God I heard one say, how did that work out for you? Did it feel like abdication? Were you grateful for the food? You can keep your aristocrat chores, 'cause I am the raccoon at your cat door. I don't even leave a trail of crumbs, 'cause I know exactly where I'm from. I'll play a banjo tune while I'm tuning it, if you'll give us an impersonation just really quick. I want to thank Shelly for coming to Missoula to release this book. Oh my gosh, such a great honor. I can't wait to pick up a copy, and yeah, I don't know what else to say about that. Thank you for making the book in the first place. I feel like talking is really important, and this is a song about talking. Talking with your friends. Tuck her pants and her boots and set out for midnight. With twirling tongues, picking locks.
Right in time. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's been truly great to be with all of you. And I do want you to help me give a big, big thank you to Sharma Shields.